Cinema plays a huge role in shaping people's views, especially when it comes to historical events and eras. For greater effect, especially in movies featuring combat scenes, the main character is often portrayed as a big guy with well-defined muscles. This taps into certain stereotypes. In our subconscious, there's a simple equation. A bigger guy with larger muscles is stronger and therefore usually wins. Interestingly, bodybuilding as a discipline focused on building a muscular physique only gained popularity in the second half of the 20th century. If you still think that just lifting weights is enough to achieve great results in this field, think again. A bodybuilder's progress relies on a proper training regimen, recovery, and a special approach to nutrition. And that's without touching on the tricky topics of genetics and pharmacology. Many professional actors aren't bodybuilders, yet they spend a lot of time training with modern techniques and literally counting every calorie. However, if we step away from the fantasy of cinema and look at real-life special forces soldiers or martial arts champions, you'll notice they rarely look like bodybuilders or weightlifters, unless you're looking at propaganda posters. The key point is that without diving into the differences in muscle fiber types or how hypertrophied muscles consume oxygen and nutrients, there's one thing to understand. This is what people who can lift heavy weights look like. And this is what endurance athletes whose muscles can work for long periods look like. The reality is, a fighter needs to be not only strong but also fast and resilient. If we talk about the Middle Ages and knights, it might sound surprising, but the weight of armor was not much heavier than the modern soldier's gear, about 30 kilograms. A complete modern Ratnik combat suit weighs 22 kilograms, not counting additional gear like ammo, grenades, and weapons. A one-handed sword rarely weighed more than 1.5 kilograms. Some might imagine the perfect medieval warrior as a huge brute wielding a heavy, rail-like sword. But one look at the winners of major medieval combat tournaments shows that extra mass and raw strength don't offer decisive advantage. Just like in any martial art, technique, speed, and endurance are what matter. But what did medieval knights actually look like? Let's start with this. The church held enormous power in medieval Europe. Up until the Renaissance in the 15th and 16th centuries, physical beauty was seen as a sign of sin, and the body was supposed to be covered with clothing. People were expected to care for their soul, while caring for the body was considered sinful. Even the profession of a healer in 11th century Europe was equated to that of a prostitute and was forbidden. A phrase like, "I do special exercises and eat certain foods to make my body look good," sounds harmless today. But back then, such statements could get you burned at the stake or excommunicated from the church. It's worth noting that many view knights as a class who trained from childhood and lived for war. Such knights likely existed, but we shouldn't forget that a knight was also a feudal lord, a landowner, and a manager. In essence, they were landlords who, depending on the period, could spend years or even decades managing their estates and dealing with local matters. This lifestyle often led to temptations of gluttony and alcohol. And this brings us to a very interesting point. The church itself was directly involved in the production of alcohol, wine, and beer during the Middle Ages. For example, by the 9th century, they owned over 400 hectares of vineyards just outside Paris. Thus, heavy drinking wasn't strongly condemned. Many monks not only took communion with wine daily, but often drank themselves into a stupor. The Carolingian era is even known as the Age of Wine Obsession. No public event was held without alcohol. Kids started drinking wine from around the age of 8. In fact, in France, it wasn't until the 1950s that wine was banned in school cafeterias, after the Ministry of Health realized that the harm from this tradition far outweighed any benefits. From this, we can conclude that there were probably plenty of overweight drinkers among knights as well. Alcohol was much less stigmatized than it is today. Moreover, there wasn't a strict hierarchy within knightly ranks, and for much of the era, these forces were more like gatherings of equals, making it difficult to enforce discipline or command. One hot topic is the height of knights. According to some estimates, their average height was between 150 and 160 centimeters, but another viewpoint comes from studying thousands of remains from St. Peter's Basilica, suggesting that the average height was 170 centimeters, not too far off from today's standards. Overall, knights were probably sturdy, solid guys, but far from having athletic physiques. They likely wouldn't stand out much in a modern crowd. In medieval frescoes and miniatures, they are usually depicted with a slim or average build.